This is the art of negotiation for rent-to-own homes. Let's look at both sides, both the tenant home buyer and the real estate investor on a rent-to-own home transaction. What we have here are the major categories: financial, property and compliance, along with contract terms, and then the tenant preference, along with the investor preference. So if we look at the financial metrics of rent, the tenant buyer down payment or option fee, the equity margin, the refundable option fee, rent credits, the buyback price, who's paying closing costs and inspections. So looking at these one by one, what does the tenant want? The tenant wants the lowest amount of rent. The investor wants the highest amount of rent. The tenant wants to put down the lowest option fee. The investor wants to put down wants the tenant to put down the highest amount. Equity margin, as we define it, which is the acquisition cost difference between the market value. So the difference between the acquisition cost and the market value. So if you have a home for 200,000, but it's actually worth 250,000, both parties want a good equity margin. A tenant would want a refundable option fee. The investor would want non-refundable. The tenant would want almost all of the rent payment to go towards credits. The investor wants the lowest amount. So there's a healthy tension here. The buyback price increase per year. The tenant wants the lowest amount. The investor wants the highest. Who pays the initial closing costs and who pays for an inspection on the home? The tenant wants the investor. The investor would like the tenant. And so what we did is we added a few categories of some examples on a rent price. So this is the average rent times 12% divided by the purchase price. So if this is a $200,000 home, this is $2,000 a month in rent. This is roughly $1,500. This is roughly $2,500. How much of a percent down the tenant is putting down? How much of an equity margin? Is it refundable? How much are standard rent credits? So we have a few values here that we can share and look at. As far as the property condition, both the tenant and the investor are looking for a great property in a great location. The tenant really wants to make sure that they're protected. The investor is open to flexible options on what that looks like. Of course, they want to follow the same rules, but from what we found is that the tenant is worried about, hey, how am I going to lose my money? Because the investor is the one on title. Tenants want to be able to get into a home with any credit score. Investors are looking for higher tenant buyer credit scores or just overall borrower grade. Tenants are hoping for maybe starter homes, nicer homes. So they're kind of going anywhere from low to high, whereas the investor is looking for kind of flexible. As far as contract terms, time to move in, tenants, are often flexible, but a lot of times they want to move in right away. Who's responsible for repairs? The tenant wants the investor to take all of them. The investor would like it if the tenant took it. How long? Tenants are typically looking for the longest option period. They want to be able to have pets and smoking. Investors are looking for flexible terms and then potentially restricting either pets or smoking. So when you show all of these values and then go through the categories, the only ones I didn't quite go through were some of the low, average, and high, but you can kind of see the ranges here from the investor taking the responsibility to the tenant, typical lengths. What a tenant buyer grade is just in general a lower grade versus a high credit score, high income earner, and then some average purchase prices along with some homes. So as you go through the negotiations, these are the key categories that we have found to be the most impactful from a negotiation standpoint between the tenant and the investor. So hopefully this helps you in your considerations as you're looking to purchase a home and enter into a fair, legitimate, and transparent rent-to-own home contract.